All right, hey, teammates, welcome to another edition of TAG Talks, where myself, General Greg Johnson, TAG 63, talks with just some wonderful teammates from TAG about topics that impact the Army and our soldiers. So this episode, which is episode 5 of our season 2, is really going to focus again on board process. We've talked this in a previous TAG talk, but I really wanted to bring in a couple other folks from TAG in our boardroom to talk the board process, and then a little bit about how that works from how we select members, how the actual board is executed, and maybe some of the myths that go on with the board process for the Army. And then really end a little bit talking about adverse and how that works in the board process. So today we have a couple of just wonderful officers. They're both majors, Major John Barry and then Major Becky Miller, who are, what's your formal title?
Board recorder, sir.
Board recorder. You probably have to tell us what board recorder means too. But anyway, so let's you guys tell us a little bit about yourselves, and then we'll get into some questions. So John, why don't you take it away?
Roger, sir. So Major John Barry, I'm a military police officer. Board recorder is part of the administrative staff that goes into execution of the board process. So we are there with the board members and part of that process, and we are also signatories to the board report that is submitted up to the convening authority, depending on who it is. So we're part of that process to ensure everything runs smoothly. So not quite the same as a court reporter or some of those items of the nature, but we ensure everything runs smoothly for the senior officers that come in.
Yeah, you're kind of making it happen.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, keeping us in line if you're sitting on a board, and then making sure everything kind of runs on time, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so how long have you been here?
2.5 years.
Yeah, so quite a while. So at this point, you're an expert. We can just hand the whole mic over to you, and you can just talk for like 4 hours.
I probably could, sir. Unconstrained, yes, sir.
Yeah, unconstrained environment we're sitting in. Becky, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yes, sir. Major Rebecca Miller. I am an engineer, and I've been in the DA Secretariat for about 1.5 years. For the position, it is important to note that the board recorder's primary objective is to maintain the integrity of the board. So we are the gatekeepers to the process to make sure that everything that happens in the boardroom remains above reproach.
Yeah, pretty important.
Yes.
Yeah, pretty important to keep the process and the sanctity of the process in play, and we're following the rules. And then it's, you can essentially, defend how we've executed promotions, right?
Correct, sir.
Yeah, and how long have you been on the team?
So it's been about 1.5 years, and I will be here for at least another year, and perhaps a little bit longer.
Yeah, so curveball, like how is this broadening, assignment for either of you, MP, engineer? If you had asked me a couple of years ago who's a board recorder, I probably wouldn't have thought engineer officers, MP officers. I would think it's maybe only AG officers. So how's this? I haven't been.
It's been an outstanding assignment for the knowledge that you gain. So being able to understand and help mentor once you leave here. So I also would have assumed that this was all AG officers until I got assigned here and really understood what our role and function is as the force. So the board recorders also make up the force. So we have multi-component, so active component, reserve, both Guard and Army Reserve in the assignment as board recorders. So truly giving that cross-section and then bringing our knowledge and experience of the population to the job, and then being able to take that back out to the field to express the same confidence that board members are able to express once they're allowed to discuss their experiences.
Yeah, I mean, there's a little bit of magic to that, I think, as you think through that, right? Hey, you come in and you do a great job, you get broadened, you understand more about, things like evals and just how this all kind of fits together, for the Army. And then you're out in the field, really helping people to understand, hey, this is how this works. There's a little bit of beauty there, I think. Becky, what has your experience so far been? And be careful, right? You still got a little bit of time here on the team.
So like John, I didn't really know much about the position, and I didn't really know much about the DA Secretariat And when I did start to learn about the position, I also assumed it was primarily for AG officers. I think the beauty of it really is, like John said, the cross-section that we have downstairs. All three components are represented. And it also, in addition to us being able to bring experience and knowledge back to the field, we are able to share component information amongst ourselves. So our teammates, when they go back to the field, have worked now with National Guard personnel or reserve personnel who they may not have otherwise worked closely with. Yeah. So it also helps dispel some potential misconceptions about technical competence or work ethic, so it helps close that gap a little bit, I think.
Yeah, well, I mean, total force. So you're executing a function for the whole Army, and the whole Army is kind of all three components, right? So I think that's what one of the cool things is of that job. And then you're doing like all boards, like, I mean, you got enlisted evaluation boards, you got, officer promotion boards, you've had traditionally the CSL, command select stuff going on. What else? SSC for officers. You got a bunch of stuff in play, right?
Yes, sir.
So there's a lot there. So shameless plug on two fronts. One is like, hey, if you want to be really broadened and you're sitting, in the force, every AIM cycle, et cetera, there's generally openings on this team, and we're always looking for folks to jump in and shape how we're doing this and participate. So there's shameless plug number one. Number two is we actually have a pretty good LPD, right, that we've already recorded, and we have it on our website. And for those looking, we'll put the site up at some point, on our social media as well that you can get to. But it's about an hour long, and I think it's really well done, and it walks through some of the mechanics. So that's kind of shameless plug number two. But for this TAG Talks, let's just talk a little bit about the board and the mechanics of it. And then you guys can kind of maybe talk some myths and, some truths, as you go through it. But starting up front, okay, so we put a MILPER message out that says, hey, there's a board coming up, whatever it is. There's a Lieutenant Colonel board coming up. Maybe talk a little bit about how the board membership is selected and put in play for that board that ends up happening.
Yes, sir. Probably start with one of the first myth is this building selects all the promotions and PMEs in schools, and that is not true.
That's Human Resources
yes,
Command.
Sorry, Human Resources Command.
The big facility on the banks of the Ohio in Kentucky.
Yes, sir. So board members may come from HRC, but that's not where we start the process. So as building that membership, there's a lot of framework that goes into creating a board membership, depending on what type of board it is. But it all starts with Title 10 U.S. Code, which states that you must have 5 commissioned officers at a minimum senior to the considered population. From there, the Army has added additional policy and regulation guidance to ensure we have adequate representation of each competitive category that is within the population. So if it's an ACC board, Army competitive category, we'll have representation from Ops, OS, FS, and ID as that board membership. And then to further expand upon the representation of the population, we also have a demographic makeup of the population to then ensure we have adequate representation in demographically, diversity, gender on the makeup. That way it's not the same type, especially now with the board results as they're published, contain the board member statistics demographically. And they publish both now in those results that are released on the HRC website.
Yeah, and I think that's probably pretty good to note that, hey, the baseline of what we're doing is tied to statute code / law, right? The easy air quote is law. And then we've layered in some policy on top of it. A lot of that policy is coming out of the DMPM, right, in the G1. Don't ask me how to pronounce all the acronym there, but that's really the policy arm of the G1 sitting up in the Pentagon. There's a really tight connection with us with them, right?
Yes, sir, there is. And actually, a DMPM does relook and revalidate, taking in all the proponencies and the convening authorities for the different boards, and revalidates or adjusts, depending on the changing nature of the Army, those requirements for board membership. So as we said earlier, the statutory minimum is 5, but in reality, the number of boards that only have 5 members is very small.
Yeah.
Sometimes they can be up to 10 times. If you're looking at the NCO evaluation board, there could be 60 both sergeant majors and officers sitting that evaluation panel. So it's really broad and diverse, and really hones in to make sure it's the most fair and equitable process to the considered population.
Yeah, that last sentence is pretty key. Yeah, and me looking at how you guys are executing that, I mean, it is pretty professional across the board, being executed. So, kind of kudos to you to keep that all in play. But at the end of the day, that's really the mandate of what you're doing as a board recorder, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about what board members experience then as they come on. So they get selected, right? They're told to show up. They show up, right? They're in civilian clothes. We're trying to keep people. We're not broadcasting who's on boards, right? We're trying to keep them a little sequestered into the the board process room where it's all done, right? Maybe talk a little bit about their experience.
Sure. So day one, the board members come in, and before they begin any record voting, they do receive a series of briefs from various subject matter experts here within Human Resources Command. And then additionally, they may receive branch briefs if they are specialty branches that are going to be seen, or nuanced CMFs that need to be discussed in the case of the NCO evaluation boards. And those briefs include from evaluations branch, the finer points of evaluation, interpretation and reading, understanding the differences between small populations and immature profiles and where to find that information. They receive a bias awareness brief that helps board members better identify potential biases within themselves, and that helps them better curb any tendency that they may have. They can identify it during the practice vote that we put them through. They also do receive briefs on the show cause process for officers, so they have a better understanding of the long-term or potential long-term ramifications of casting a particular type of vote while they're in the boardroom. So the intent really is to make sure that board members are very educated and have an opportunity to ask questions prior to sitting down and casting their first vote for record. We do put them through a practice vote where they have an opportunity to see a variety of different types of files. So anywhere from top performers within a given field to...
You too, right? Yeah.
Yep, that's all day long, sir, that's us. To perhaps mid-tier performers, solid officers, but maybe not what a voter might typically consider a rock star. And then a smattering of perhaps files with derogatory information. And this better helps the voters identify what a specific numerical score means to them so that they can develop their own individual voter philosophy before moving into record voting. The intent here really is to maintain consistency throughout the process, so every file is seen with the same set of rules that each individual voter has established for him or herself for the process.
Yeah, really important. And John, talk a little bit about the MOI too, right? Because folks coming into this process, they're given the MOI, gives them some baseline, instructions that's really set by the Sec Army. But that helps lead into this kind of prep and then moving into the actual execution of the board.
Yes, sir. So they're able to read and review the MOI prior to them receiving those day one briefs, which really hone in what they're going to see, not how to interpret it or how to apply a score to it. That's really coming from the convening authority, primarily the Secretary, but it could be the Chief of the Army Reserve or the CSA, depending on what type of board it is. And that's going to give the board their left and right limits as they execute the board. Because the board as a whole, and as they develop that individual voter philosophy, cannot adopt a criteria that's not within the Secretary's MOI, because that would be in violation of her guidance to the board. And when we get into the control measure, we'll talk about how that is managed throughout the process. But the MOI really is the instruction to the board of what the Army is looking for as those best qualified officers or NCOs as they're doing the evaluation board, just to really hone in how to stratify the population that's being considered.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you're leading us to talking a little bit about control measures. So yeah, just jump into that. Like, what's in place to really kind of, I would say manage the board, but you probably have something more eloquent to say on that, John.
Yes, sir. So we'll actually take a step back. So we started the conversation on MILPERS. The MILPER is the guiding announcement that a board is going to occur. Within that MILPER, there's several cutoff dates. Sometimes they'll relate to promotion evaluations or complete the record evaluations. Those cutoff dates, those are hard and true. So if an eval doesn't meet the cutoff date, that won't come into the board. So that's a control measure before the board even shows up day one.
Yeah.
Same thing goes for the letters to the board president or letter in response to adverse. Very detailed instructions to the field on when their ability to influence their file ends. And then once we move into the board room, we synchronize all the files so that everything that was submitted in accordance with the MILPER that should be available to the board for their deliberation is available. So we have the technology safeguards in place to protect the data aspect of it. And then once we move into the board operates and is told prior to arrival and then upon arrival in the MOI that they have to comply with various laws, DOTI policies, and Army regulation, all encapsulated within the MOI. And in those briefings, we provide them a concept briefing. Here for this particular mission is the Secretary's guidance and bounds left and right. And we'll focus them in on the totality of the file and the totality of the MOI, because there's not one indicator that is an automatic select or an automatic non-select. It's the totality of the MOI applied when reviewing the officer's file. A control measure for the board process is that no one can appear and discuss items with the board at any time that's not approved by the Secretary. So all those day one briefs, those are approved by the Secretary. The people coming in to brief are approved by the Secretary. And the key takeaway for that, just to bring it home of how important and safeguarded that process is, even if Secretary Wormuth came to the board and gave guidance, we would have to capture verbatim that guidance to the board and include it as part of the board report that was sent up. So even she's the signatory of the MOI, we have to capture that down, and that's all part of our SOP and our regulations.
Yeah, really, I mean, I say it's stringent, but the MOIs change over time a little bit, right?
Yes, sir.
So that we've seen that, but nevertheless, it really helps guide the specifics when we go in to execute the board. And then obviously the biggest message out to the field is that initial MILPER,
Yes, sir.
right? You get your My Board file out of that. You get your opportunity to provide input if you need to, which I think is also pretty important, right? I know we're pushing the G1s and individuals out in the field pretty stringently now, and what we'll do in the future is like, hey, go in and look at that My Board file, because it's one of those things that again, I didn't think that you guys would be sitting in this job, right? Because you're not AG. I would think everybody would look at their My Board file, before a promotion board or before an evaluation board, but that's not the case. So that's one of the asks that we have for the field is that folks do that. G1s focus on that. S1s focus on that.
Yes, sir.
What else we got?
So a couple more control measures just to really hone in, because I think it can play into common myths that are out there. So board members are advised early on, and then we are in the boardroom at all times. Anytime a board member's in a room, there's a recorder in the room.
Yeah.
That's why if we have two recorders, we always have more than one recorder assigned to every board. board members can never discuss individual candidate files, and there cannot be any discussion of an individual voter philosophy. So if I was a board member, I couldn't say,
Yeah.
I think a 6+ is this, and this is what it means to me, because that may influence Major Miller's vote of that officer's file or officers of that nature.
Yeah.
So we're in there to control that discussion. The only exception to that are the specialty boards, general officer boards, which are authorized personal knowledge, but even that is very constricted or regulated
Yeah,
on
controlled.
what
Yeah.
can be
Yeah.
talked about as far as that personal knowledge. But in the boardroom, we ensure there's no discussion within that. And then the last, really the bring it home to the integrity of the process and the fair and equitable, is every board member certifies to the recessing official and to the convening authority that it was fair and equitable. They selected the best officers or NCOs to meet the needs of the Army, and that appropriate consideration was given to all candidates, to include those with joint and adverse information. So they certify that at the end of the mission each time, just to ensure we started at a baseline of where we were day one, and now we're 5 days to 30 days into the process, and we still agree with that assessment, and they certify that.
Yeah, that's pretty important. I got a couple other questions that I want to throw at you guys. One's about, is there classified stuff in this board process? How do we navigate that?
Yes. So, sir, we do have classified documents that are seen by the board members as well as controlled candidates. So we currently do use a system. It's the Army Selection Board System, or ASBS. We have a NIPR version, and then we have a SIPR version. And both versions are available at each voter's workstation. When they are prompted to go to the classified side, they are able to switch over to view those files for the candidates that those are applicable to. And then they simply cast their vote in the NIPR version of the system, so those votes are still captured digitally. So we do have several other agencies within Human Resource Command that we coordinate with to make sure that classified evaluations all make it over to ASBS SIPR. And we will cross-check to make sure that everything that is supposed to be there has in fact made it. And that's part of our pre-board process, where we do a handoff checklist just to validate, this is what we're tracking, is that the same thing you're tracking? Do we have everything that we are supposed to have for these candidates? It is important to note as well that in the boardroom, when we have classified documents being seen, personal electronic devices are not authorized in the room. Even when we are showing unclassified, they are still, although authorized, generally discouraged because they can be a distraction. And I think that one of the myths that tends to be out there is that people might share information or, find some way to take photos or what have you, but that none of that happens. The same rules apply for SIPR in the DA Secretariat as would apply elsewhere in the Army.
Yeah. I mean, I know I left my phone outside the boardroom when entering, not allowed. But no, that's good to know. So, right, if you have some sort of classified paper, that's going to make it into your board. So I think that's good for folks to know, out in the field. Let's circle up with adverse. And I know we're really going to move forward with a little bit of messaging on how the adverse process is working, specifically tied to the boards, in future months. So we'll end up having a tag sends that lays a lot of this out, and then where we're moving on, how do we update officers and others that are involved in the process. We're really reworking that a little bit here at HRC as we focus on customer service. And really pushing how we interact with folks in the Army. But you talk a little bit about adverse in the boards?
Yes, sir. So again, it goes back to that base document that'll notify the officer, and that's the MILPER. The MILPER will contain information about what type of adverse information is going to be shown to the board. And the guiding principle behind what is going to be shown is found in law. So NDA 20 and then 21 directed that adverse information will be included as part of the promotions process as a whole. But adverse information isn't new to the Army. the Army has been doing post-board adverse screening since 2015. It's just now where in the promotions process that it's going to be seen. So now it'll be shown to the board for those officers, active component, major and above, and then reserve component, colonel and above. The board will have access to permanently filed adverse information, so things in your performance folder, things in your restricted folder of the AMHR, as well as substantiated, completed investigations from the reporting agency, JAG, EO, CID, and IG, will be encapsulated and summarized for the board's view. All other boards, so we're talking lieutenant colonel and below reserve component, or captain and below active component, if a board is convened, will only see those things permanently found in the performance folder. And then the rest would be caught up in a post-board screen.
Yeah, no, I think that was pretty succinct in the way that you explained that. But for folks that are listening or watching, we're really going to lay this out pretty holistically in a upcoming tag sends, and then we're going to end up doing I won't say town hall, but we'll do an LPD similar to the board process to kind of highlight how this works and what goes in, what goes out. Because I know there's a lot of there's just a lot of questions about that from officers. The key, I think, number one key, right? You get this MILPER message, your My Board file opens, you get to see what's in that board file.
Yes, sir.
And for me, that's the most important thing, is that the officer has the opportunity to see what that is, and then they get the opportunity to provide some comments if they so choose, right? So for me, that's one big control mechanism that an officer kind of has in play. They understand what's in there, and then they have an opportunity to comment. The other thing I would say is that this process has been going on for a little while, and folks just need to know it's not going away, right?
Sure.
So the law dictates that we're doing certain things. We have some policy that dictates that we're doing certain things, based on adverse. And that's really not going away. So we're going to take a good shot at publicizing this a little bit better and doing LPDs to really educate. I think we owe that to the Army, and we're going to do that. And obviously, you're going to help, right? Because you're in the boardroom and you know how this works, and who better to kind of talk this process than you that's working it on the front lines. So I think we're at the close today. But any parting shots, Becky? Got to say something.
No, I think it was mentioned several times, and I think that it is probably worth mentioning just one more time, the importance of thoroughly reading the MILPERs when they come out, to know what is going to be seen, what the expectations are, and what the dates on the calendar are, and what they're for. Because not every MILPER is going to be the same. It's not going to be cookie cutter from one year to the next. There are going to be changes with the NDAA, different requirements, updates to policy. So it really is incumbent on the soldier to take a look, and if they don't understand something in the MILPER, to reach out and ask for an assist in reading and understanding what the expectations are.
Yeah, tag tip of the day, as a S1 or a G1, I would capture all those MILPERs coming out, have the team kind of coalesce them, make sure they're out to everybody who is eligible based on those parameters in the MILPER, and then we'd track who was actually getting into those My Board files, just because I think that's part of the role of the HR professional out in the field, helping the force kind of understand what's in play, and then how they prep properly to put their best foot forward into a board. Yes, John, what do you got?
Mine falls similar into that, but an officer or an NCO, really any soldier in the Army, has access to their iPerms.
Yeah.
And making sure, whether you're going to a board tomorrow or your first look is 4 years from now, making sure those things which should be in your file are in your file. And if you have errors in your file, it's a lot easier to try and work that when you're not worried about your next promotion. then trying to do it and make sure your thing's ready for a board, and you realize your transcripts is ineligible, you can't read it.
Yeah.
Getting that stuff fixed now, then when your My Board file opens, you're like, yep, everything's set, certified, done.
Yeah. It's hard to buy Christmas presents though in June, right?
Yes, sir.
Right, John? So sometimes we just got to nudge folks. But hey, a couple of plugs here again, and those were great points by both of you. We got a lot of social media stuff out there. There's a My Board Facebook page, and we are posting kind of reminders and things on that Facebook page. We are doing that on the tag page as well, and there's a little bit on the HRC Facebook page. So there's three kind of avenues that soldiers can kind of follow and get some upfront feedback on what's coming next. And if you're not kind of following S1Net, that's another trick of the trade for me. It's like just always looking at S1Net and the emails that go out, because almost every MILPER that's published, right, is published at least also through S1Net. So it gives you a leg up on understanding, hey, what dropped in the last couple of days or whatever, even the day prior to that email. But hey, I really appreciate you jumping on Tag Talks today, and looking forward to continuing to work with you down in the boardroom. And for the audience, there's more to come. We have quite a few Tag Talks planned over the next 6 months, so look forward to engaging with you via that medium, but then also follow us on Facebook, and you'll get a lot more information as we publish it. So thanks much.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Awesome.